Why's everything got to be so complex? You know what? They say that happiness is a choice. I believe that complexity is a choice too. And if complexity is a choice, then simplicity must be a choice also, right? Let's talk more about it. That's this week on the Badass Agile podcast. Greetings, team. Welcome to the Badass Agile podcast. I'm your host, Chris Williams. Hello, all my wonderful friends. How are you? It's great to see you. Thank you, as always, for tuning in from more than 115 countries. I appreciate each and every one of you. Very happy to see you today. Listen, complexity is a choice to surround a simple concept or a simple task or a simple outcome with less autonomy and more rules. Why? It's usually to create more certainty and safety. Well, let's get into why that happens and how you can break it. But first, let's take a moment to remember why we're here. To create an elite tribe of leaders who truly serve their clients and communities by doing what matters and what works, relentlessly chasing value and excellence like a badass. There are so many resources about what you need to do to be agile, but we're focused on who you need to become in order to lead teams. So let's hammer down those fundamentals to create a truly unique and powerful force in this industry. I only ask one thing, that if this show helps you, please don't forget to tell your friends. Now, you can also join in on the fun at the Badass Agile Listener Lounge on Facebook. Look for us there. There's all kinds of extra treats and polls and fun stuff that we do every week. So don't be the uncool kid hanging out by the lockers with no friends. Come on in and join us. Okay, so complexity. If you think about it, anytime you have a complex process or complex flow, it's usually because you're trying to create so many safeguards. You're trying to catch all of the mistakes. Essentially, you're trying to get it perfect and sure. Isn't that so? Think about it. What process or flow do you have that is so complex, that has so many steps, so many signatures, so many approvals, that it creates extra unnatural work, that if you could just do it and fire it out the door, wouldn't exist? The most common examples are often found right near the moment of release. So how many things do you got to do, line up, and sign off before you're willing to call something shippable and put it out the door? But it can also happen when you're designing solutions. You got a problem, you want to fix a problem, and before you know it, you're writing all of this code that's fancy for its own sake, that's showing off the things that you could do just because you could do them, not because you should. Well, the latter's probably the easier one to solve, because all you got to do is slap yourself on the wrist and realize you're making this overtly complex just because you can. Sometimes it's fun to geek out. But what happens then, if you've ever watched the show Home Improvement, was like back from the 80s, is that you end up with these overbuilt, supercharged solutions that are way too much for the question at hand. And of course, that creates waste. So park that one. We'll come back to it in a sec. The other kind of complexity is the one I'm worried about. That's the one where we make things so complex just because we want to make sure we get it perfect. And when complexity creates unhappiness, pay careful attention to this, is when it's imposed by others. If you make something super complex because you're a perfectionist, that's easy to cure. But if a process has been handed to you or mandated, there's also a chance it's been made complex because I'm trying to make sure that you don't make a mistake. And the French word for that is, I don't trust you. So it is often a true statement that anytime you see something that's unusually or unnaturally complex, you're looking at something that was built from a place of fear, lack of trust, or excessive craving for certainty. Now, in the Agile way, all of these things are costly, not just because they're wasteful, but because of their intention. They come from a place of lack of trust. They come from a place of fear. And because that's their source, the outcome is never pure. It's never good. So how can you battle complexity? Well, in all of the cases, whether it's complex because you're showing off, because you like creating cool things, or because you're a little worried about trying to make things too perfect, or it's been mandated or handed to you, here's what you can do to begin reducing or eliminating unnecessary complexity. Number 1, know your outcome. Let's not forget, the Badass Agile Way says that first, be visionary. Know where you're going. So let me use my podcast as an example. With my show, I want to do a couple things. Number 1, I wanted to create a podcast that was well thought out, that created massive value in the marketplace. I also wanted it to sound great. No mistakes, no breaths, no background noises, clean. And let's imagine I also wanted to release transcripts so that people who, for whatever reason, can't hear the podcast could read it. So those are my definitions of done and done well. That's my vision, essentially. Well, you can imagine how quickly that would become complex and time-consuming. To get perfect tone, you got a ton of editing to do. You got to make sure the hot water heater's shut off, the fridge isn't running, nothing in the room creaks. I even have to watch how much I breathe. To make something that's impactful, that creates value in the marketplace, I have to really think about my topics. Maybe ask questions. What do people want to hear about? What problems would they like to solve? And then the transcript. Oh my God, I got to listen to the episode, stop, rewind, type, stop, rewind, type some more. That's a lot of work. And so to release it multiple times a week to keep people engaged, well, that's another outcome. So the first thing you need to do is decide what your definition of done and done well is. What's the world look like when you smash a home run? Now, what I want you to do is to put those in priority order. So all of those things were important to me, but at the top of the list was massive value. In the middle of the list is the sound quality, and at the bottom of the list is a 100% accurate transcript of the show. The next question to ask yourself is, what do I believe about these outcomes that forces me to do things with too much complexity? So my beliefs around value is that it has to be things that users or listeners really want to hear about. My belief around sound quality is that it has to sound like a radio broadcast, no mistakes. And my belief around the transcript is that it has to be 100% word for word perfect, punctuation and everything. So some of those beliefs create lack of trust. Think about it. If I believe that a good quality, high value show only comes from knowing what my users are begging to hear about, that forces me to do a bunch of things to find out what they're thinking, what they're loving, and actually cheat myself of the chance to put my ideas, my beliefs, out into the marketplace via the show. So maybe changing my belief that value comes from the combination of asking people what they want to hear, but also talking about what keeps popping up for me. Any idea that I have or wake up with or dream about more than 3 times in a row over the period of more than a couple of weeks is something I'm burning to talk about. And that gut, that instinct, ends up being very rarely wrong. So if I just trusted myself a little bit more, I could get the results I want with less effort, less poking around. And it feels good to trust your gut, just like it feels good to trust your peeps. Here's my next belief. A perfect radio quality show can only come from a complete absence of noise, mistakes, errors, even breath sounds. Imagine the extra work that it takes to not just get the show sounding good, but to make sure that all the mistakes have been trimmed out. It creates extra work, it creates extra pressure when you're performing to be flawless, and that's never good. The next belief is that the transcript has to be 100% perfect, meaning word for word, no misinterpretations, no misunderstandings, and guess what? The only way to make sure it's perfect is for me to do it by hand, by myself. Meaning I can't trust anybody to do this as well as I will, because if I trust somebody else, they'll screw it up. All right, the last question to ask yourself is, what changes could I make to get most of my highest value outcomes, my definitions of done and done well, in the shortest possible time? Sometimes a better way to ask that question is, how could this be simpler? It's already had one solution, which is trust my gut, let it ride. The great topics come from the things that I hear about, the things that drive me nuts, the things that I'm burning to talk about, and the feeling doesn't go away quickly. But what about the quality of the show? Well, here's what I learned, is that if one of my outcomes is to be able to produce content frequently, I can't afford to spend that much time on quality all the time. So I invented the Badass Unscripted Show. In the Badass Unscripted Show, I have a simple solution to getting rid of the noise and the breaths. I put music underneath. If you put music underneath, those problems, those errors still exist, but you can't hear them. So all I have to focus on is taking out the really bad mistakes, the trip-ups, the long pauses, and voila, I have a done episode. And as for the transcripts, man, that's work I just don't want to do. So, in an ideal world, if this were simple would look like me having a robot do it for me. Well, that's not possible, or is it? Sure it is. There's all these services out there using AI that will transcribe for me. What do you know? All right, so I use one of them and it's 80 to 85% perfect. So now what? I got to hand edit the rest by myself? Well, I could. Or what if I put it out there on a wiki and ask people if they find mistakes to go change them? Boom. The things that are really begging to be changed. The things that are clearly not right. If it's important to people, they'll go in and fix it. I haven't tried that idea yet, but it's an example that you could use in the team room of trusting people to fix the things that are causing the most pain. So imagine what my workflow would have looked like before I changed my beliefs, before I settled on my priorities, before I asked the question, how could this be simpler? So now you try it. Go back to your teams this week and ask those questions. What are the outcomes? And let's rank them. What are the beliefs I have around these outcomes and the way that we get them? Look carefully for things that indicate fear, lack of trust, or desire for certainty, and then ask the question, what if I eliminated all those fears and simply made it simpler? How could this be faster? And if you find something that ticks most of the boxes in priority order, you're on to a simpler solution and reducing complexity, reducing waste. And if you're very lucky and you're very good and you're very persistent, you'll also increase trust and increase courage. Friends, thank you for listening. You can reach out at badassagile.com or find me on Twitter at badass_agile. I look forward to seeing you next time, and until then, stay badass.